fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCW 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren. Mr. Martini's on the other side of the planet.
On the other side of the planet?
In your mind, you're always over there.
Yeah, I'm in outer space.
Yeah, he's wearing his dress and his army boots.
Yeah.
And he's got his cigar ready to go.
I know. What's new, right?
Yeah. Life in the city, I'll tell you. There's nothing like it. Kind of like a Madonna video or something.
Well, did they pick your pictures?
No, they still haven't picked the few, so I don't know which one will be gracing the world.
Can't wait. I'm excited.
Why are you excited? I look terrible and all. Like I said, I was just shocked at how old I got.
No.
Yeah. What do you mean no? I'm in shock. I looked and I go, my God. I was depressed for an hour.
We all feel like that when we see our pictures.
Well, yeah, but you were never.
I always try to remind
you were never
myself.
Beautiful. I was.
That's true. I always just try to remind myself that the camera puts 40 pounds on. So
40 looked like it put on 100.
Yeah, that's true.
My God.
But hey,
and of course that's all I'm looking at. You ever look at it and I think, my God, it's going to be in a magazine. Everyone's going to see that. They're going to go, who's that fat old man? Of course, that's what's been going on in my mind ever since. I thought the professional could make me look good.
You do look good, Al.
Oh. Because they take up from above and below and on the side. There are all these angles, and they look like they're really. I felt like I was like, I don't know, some model for a minute. That didn't turn out when I saw the pictures. I don't look like Christy Brinkley or anything. My God. I should have done something like that. Maybe it would have looked better. Makeup. At least they didn't ask to powder my forehead or my head.
Yeah.
Right? That's a change.
You're ready for your close-up.
I'm ready. Yeah. Not too much glare. Well, now today we are getting, this is actually our 100th show of the year today.
Wow.
And then I get to go on my little vacation. Yeah, not a big deal. Back after the long weekend in July.
Yeah.
So for our 100th and our final show of the first half of the year, we've got quite an interesting fellow here. So he's done some really good writing here. So let's just bring him in, Mr. Jim Provenzano. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Well, we haven't had you yet.
Inviting me to your show.
Nice, that's better. Wow. So I always start this way because it really interests me when I get someone and a writer to kind of want to know what happened in their life that made them think they could write. And it's not as bad as that sounds. I mean
Right.
this in a way of like, there's plenty of people that write, to themselves, diaries, journals, their own books, do this stuff. But what is it in your life that made you think that this is what you want to do?
I always wanted to write, but I ended up doing lots of other things. I had a very encouraging family. My parents loved getting gifts of little handmade books that I made since I was a child, little stapled together pages and cartoons. My brother and I mostly, and my sister, were very creative. We were encouraged to be creative in performing and extracurricular activities. And I think the funniest stories, cute stories in junior high school, we had I don't know if they still have them, called career days, where you asked to go for a day to some job that you'd like to have. Of course, most kids don't get to do that. They end up going to, bakeries, or one couple ended up going to, a couple of kids ended up going to the local mortuary in the small town in Ohio where I was raised. I said in the middle of the English class, I said to my teacher, I want to be an author. And she said, well, we don't have those here. It was actually wrong. There were several authors even back in the 70s. But I ended up being assigned with the local newspaper's photojournalist. So I ended up covering other kids doing their career days and taking pictures and doing interviews. And it led to my being in the, working in the school newspaper, making cartoons for the paper, and then realizing later on that journalism was a way to write when I still didn't know how to write fiction. So I started, by the time of 1989, I started freelancing and also working at Outweek magazine in New York City, where my first published articles were arts reviews of plays edited by the late, great Sarah Pettit, Michelangelo Signorelli. It was a great crew of people who all blossomed on to other things. Dale Peck, Walter Armstrong went to edit Pause, Gabriel Rotella. So there was a whole creative field of freedom, but it was also gay specific. So that was a real opening of my voice to allow me to write as an openly gay man. It was a big deal. And, the fiction kind of trailed along behind that. And through the 80s in New York, I dabbled with some short stories and dribblings of little novels that became completed later on. But by the early 90s, 1992, I moved here to California because I couldn't get work enough in New York. So I started freelancing for a lot of California papers. And on a visit, I brought my resume, and I went to the Guardian and they said, oh, we have internships. And I replied, well, I have 3 advocate cover stories, so goodbye. So I did not do the internship. But at the Bay Area Reporter, there was a writer, a calendar editor who, and I'd done that before, who was going on a trip to Italy for 2 months. So I substituted for him. And then when he came back, he got boosted to being the accountant, and I had a full-time job. So thanks to the BAR and Bob Ross, I had a job, I got an apartment, and I moved to, and then I started really writing a lot more. And I found that journalism and photojournalism and my later sports column that I had for 10 years led to creative writing, because you could use the skills that you learned, the deadlines that you had, self-imposed or imposed, and the research was something that was fascinating to me. For all of my fiction novels and the short stories, there's some research in reality in all of those. Topics that I didn't know very well that I learned a lot about, from wrestling to cycling to cater waitering to dating a disabled person, and other themes that were like, well, I know something about this, but I need to do homework and research the way I did for my journalism. So they paired nicely through a performing arts career that came and went. But since then, I've been writing specifically for a living for the last 30 years. Yeah.
And I'm sure with your, having to do the research, you would just get in there and do it personally. Personally,
but also other books, when my first novel, Pins, about gay high school wrestlers in the 90s in suburban New Jersey, I did not wrestle as a kid. I wrestled as an adult with the what they call masters teams, like Golden Gate Wrestling, and competed in tournaments around. So I transferred my actual experiences into those of a teenager. That was something very visceral that I got a lot of kudos for, because you can't fake this kind of activity. You can maybe fake basketball if you're a fan, but there's a tactile, really intensity to that wrestling that you can't make up. You need to know through experiences, and you need to know the terminology.
And I've wrestled with plenty of men too, but not professionally. But
no, I'm sure it was a very different style.
But I learned a lot, and you can't fake that either. That comes. But what do you think of the world of journalism as far as the gay world, and being specifically about gay and gay writing and gay books and stuff like that? And I mean this because in my mind, like, I'm just turning 60, and from over my period of life, it seemed to me that it was really kind of peaking in the 90s. And it seemed like it was getting a lot of, I don't want to say popularity, but it was becoming important. But I'm not getting the same sort of feeling nowadays, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, it's changed a lot, and I've seen a lot of evolution. I mean, as you said, in the early '90s, I was also still writing. There were like 6 LGBT newspapers in the Bay Area, and they all catered to different markets. But I had been freelancing for The Advocate, for Frontiers. I helped create 3 or 4 different publications, like 10%, that came and went. And there was a surplus of print media just before the internet broke. And that those who made that transition survived by creating websites, by doing online journalism. The precursor to podcasts, audio recordings was a big to do. So having those who adapted survived, and now there's thousands of websites that don't print publication, or they have a PDF that's downloadable. So there are a lot that have come and gone, but there are still many still existing. The diversity of voices too, has shifted. It was, predominantly gay white male, and now there's a diversity. There's publications that are specific to all different people in the letters of our acronym, and all those that focus on diversity. And that's one of the things that I focus on since I've been mostly arts, some sports for 10 years, but now as the last 2 years, the arts and nightlife editor for the Bay Area Reporter, really focusing on diversity, intentional diversity, to really visualize the community, not just in feature articles, but also just general nightlife photos. I had one photographer that I said, stop taking pictures of the cute young guys only, and don't just take pictures of the drag queen on stage, take pictures of the people in the audience. So wanting to deliberately visualize bears and elders and disabled people in bars was something that was definitely a focus that I've had in my years growing up in media.
Yeah. Do you think that this is kind of where I'm getting at, major publishers, the big boys. Do you think that they're really buying gay material nowadays?
You mean books?
Yeah.
The big 5, yeah, that's a question. I mean, having had an agent that 2 big agents that failed to sell my first novel, I took to myself and did it all myself. This is before print on demand. I hired a printer. I was shipping cartons of books with UPS, East and West Coast. I was making deals with, bookstores around the world and going to conventions. It was a big deal. It was a lot. I learned everything about it through some very good instructional books, but also through people like the late Richard Labonte, who was the manager of a Different Light bookstore, who told me, go to this distributor, go to this conference, here's how to make postcards to send to libraries and things like that are just skills that you learn that nowadays anyone can publish anything themselves. But I'm seeing a lot of queer books being published by the big 5, Simon & Schuster, etc. We just had one of my great book reviewers, Jim Piota, did a 3-part series where he did about a dozen books per issue. And there was so much diversity. There was so much new storytelling, and vibrant book covers, etc. That it was really great to be able to pack them all in, because there's so many books that we try to review and get coverage. And I try to read myself, but there's only so much time in the day. But I think there is a lot of new authors who know how to market themselves and know how to pitch properly and get agents and get healthy book deals. But I've pretty much been self-publishing because I didn't have the patience to wait around for an agent in New York City to say, give me their nod of approval. I don't do queries very well.
Yeah. Well, I'm the same. I've had 3 different publishers, and I'm the same. I'm not I don't know. I guess I don't play well with others.
I think I play well with others. It's just that when you own your own vehicle, when you own your own project, you get more money, but also you can determine where it goes. I mean, I have several friends now, old friends, who have books out right now, and, we got a review for them in my paper, but they tell me, oh, well, the bookstores I visited didn't have the books, or they're not paying for a tour. I have to do my own social media. One of the queries on submittables now is, not only here, give us an excerpt, but give us links to all your social media to prove that you're popular.
Yeah.
That's a downfall, because it's like, if you haven't published your first novel yet, how can you be popular? Well, you should have short stories. You should have little essays published. You should do you have to have something in order to get something. And that's where I feel like I got in before that took over.
Yeah. Yeah. Because nowadays, it's how many followers you have, or, if you're on TikTok and you have like 40,000 people, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't have a cute boyfriend or pet.
Yeah.
I don't get cute on a daily basis. I do. Here's an article I wrote. Read it or don't. I don't care.
Yeah, and I'm kind of that way. But you were a dancer right? You've got dancing history, so you could get on TikTok and start showing it off.
That was a long time ago. My friend John Weir, who's a dear, talented author, his book, which I will plug, Your Nostalgia is Killing Me, he's kind of in a meta version of doing TikTok and social media. He's aware of how silly it is, and yet he's self-confessing and doing a kind of persona that is he's aware of it and you're aware of it. So he's very clever about it. Whereas other people take themselves too seriously with their makeup, cake baking tutorials. And, I just don't do that. I don't have time for it. I barely have time to, like this morning, I posted the cover of the BAR's Pride issue because it's very colorful and flashy. And I did 3 media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And then I had to eat breakfast and get here to do the interview. Really don't have time to invest in being a brilliant lip sync of the latest, Beyonce.
Oh, come on. Well, isn't that kind of expected in a way? But does that bother you how social media has such a command or power over what's going on and what sells and what doesn't, or who's doing what, that you kind of almost have to do things that you don't want to do? I mean, it sounds like you're kind of just doing what you want and it doesn't matter, but in general, I think people have to.
Well, the art making has always been a cult of personality. My favorite is the Sunny in the Park with George, Act 2, where, he's talking about art isn't easy, and that it's negotiating and it's dealing and it's hobnobbing. And, I've done that, and now I feel like I'm in a position where I don't have to do that. But you still do in a way. You need to maybe boost an ad, or you need to boost an Instagram post, or you need to be clever and cute and available. Whereas someone like Andrew Holleran has a new book out, and he's doing interviews, and that's great. But he's Andrew Holleran, so he can be a little choosy. So it is that, just the cult of personality is something that is part of it. And, I have a YouTube channel, I have a Twitter account, I have all the things. I love making trailers for my books. About my last 5 novels, I think I've made trailers because I can. I'd rather spend 20 hours on 2 minutes that are really good than, a silly TikTok thing that is not, it's going to get a bunch of likes, but it's not going to get sales.
Yeah. And you could be like Dave. He sleeps his way to the top every time.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
yeah. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
No, not really.
Yeah. No, it doesn't work that good, obviously.
No, obviously.
No, but so now looking through your book list, now I noticed the newest one you put out was just here in May, and that's The Lost of New York. So that's I see. I like the title. I like the cover because I'm into that. I'm into this. This is kind of good. What's the premise of this book?
Well, I'm glad that we're talking about it. You're the first to let me talk about it because there is a kind of mystery to the whole book. It's the unfinished novel by my late uncle, John Butch Rigney Jr. I love his nickname. I didn't put it in the title because he wanted to be a serious author. The story is basically in the mid 80s. My family's from New York City in various places, and I was raised in Ohio. And then I moved back to Ohio and so to New York City, and so did my brother. And I used to visit my grandmother up in the Bronx on 238th Street, too infrequently, unfortunately, because she was getting old. And she got sick, so my mom drove in with my dad, and she took care of her and got her hospitalized, and we had to move her into a nursing home and clean out her apartment. So my roommate at the time had a van. We lived in a loft in Jersey City, and we took most of the furniture, which was just furniture. It was nothing, fascinating. She had a lot of Agatha Christie books. And then there was this yellow plastic file folder that we didn't know what it was. And I looked at it, and it was a bunch of typed manuscript pages. And I had yet to write like more than a short story at the time. So I was like, that's your Uncle Butch's book that he tried to get written. And I was like, okay. So we mailed it home. She took it home, and it was in the attic for years. Years later, I was cleaning out the attic, getting rid of old toys and stuff. setting squirrel bait, and I refound the yellow file folder, and I opened it and looked at it and looked through it, and it was this novel and a half and some short stories and notes from my deceased uncle who died in 1967. And so I took it, I shipped it to myself in San Francisco. A friend of mine worked for a law firm, knew how to copy, PDFify, and PDF to text. So I had a text document, very rough, very sloppy because it didn't transfer well. And I took a few years and put it aside and turned it into a book that I got to show my mother before she died in 2009, about 10 years before she died. So she got to read a privately printed version of Uncle Butch's novel. Then at the time it was called Bugs in a Jar. That's a reference to going bugs. I guess that's one of those 60s terms for going to the insane asylum or something. I like the metaphor, but it was misplaced. So I changed the title to The Lost of New York because no one else had used that title. And basically I took a few more years off, did some other of my own projects, and then decided, I'm going to do this. I need to publish this because with very little fanfare, I cleaned it up even more. I had to change a few characters, had died in one chapter and weren't dead in the next. So I had to change a few things, but basically I tried to keep it as it was with this very gritty, urban, sad, parolees and prostitutes and junkies. It was very Last Exit to Brooklyn, very serious, and a roman à clef. It was clearly based on patches of Uncle Butch's life in the Bronx in the 60s. And I put it all together, and then my brother did the cover because he had the rights-free usage of some of these old comic books. And I had to clarify that not only is this not my work, but it's also a straight book because all my other books are gay. They're very gay. They're not all specifically gay on the cover, but they're marketed that way. And I just wrote up a little bio of him, his fascinating life on my website, jimprovenzano.com. And I got a really good response from it because I had also submitted to a library catalog listing through Ingram, the publisher and distributor.
Right.
And it sold like 70 copies because all these libraries just wanted a copy. Libraries like to have new books. I haven't done extensive touring or readings or anything about it because it's his work, but also I'm just glad I got it done because I know how to do it and I did it. So if you want to read a story that is strange and sad and bittersweet, and it was written then, so it very much is of that era. It has a very early 60s, late 50s feel to it of, the betrayals and the petty lives of people who, are just living on the shred of their lives and cupping living together and getting drunk and romancing. And it's nothing like I would have ever written, which is fascinating too. So that's what The Lost of New York is all about. And I'm just happy that I got to belatedly publish my uncle's novel because I think I got the writing DNA from his side of the family.
Well, did you have to add to it? Did you have to try to, match his style and his voice in editing this novel to completion?
I didn't want to do anything to it except I added a few sentences for clarity. I had to decide on spelling and punctuation consistency because like the word friggin is spelled two different ways. So I had to decide on one and do a find replace. I had to do a lot of apostrophes because words are shortened in the dialect. He was very dialect heavy with the very Bronx accents. And I wanted to retain that, even though it shows itself as very dated because it's a 60-year-old manuscript. But I didn't clean it up, per se, as much as just clarify things. I moved a few chapters where the lead character, Bob Coffin, is not a subtle metaphor, is in jail. And I moved that around so that we go in and out of prison because he had like 7 prison chapters all in a row. And I thought, well, let's not do that. We can cinematically move away from prison and then have it develop. And then he finally gets out on parole. And then his relationship with Nancy falls apart and there's betrayals and sexual problems. And it's very, I really don't know. It's like the novels of the day because he was basically writing of, he was inspired obviously by, Hemingway and Faulkner and the others. He had read a lot. This is a strange thing too, that for a while when he was writing it, he had been arrested again. He had done crimes and they are documented in the book in a way. And one of the craziest things he did was jumped off the Devil's Bridge in the Bronx. I forget the German name, the Dutch name. But he went to jail for that. and another thing. And they said, well, you can go to jail or you can join the Air Force in Alaska for 2 years. And he shipped out to Alaska, and he obviously had a lot of free time because that's where he wrote most of this. So he was, just holed up and learning how to write and reading other books. There's a lot of little scraps of paper where he writes down multisyllabic words for vocabulary builders. So there's a few references where there's a big word thrown in now and then that's a little out of place. And I kind of kept it in because it had a kind of charm to it. But basically, it's an almost complete story about these Nancy and Bob, and then their circle of friends. And some of them get married, some of them die, some of them, get in fights, and it's just very of the scene of the era.
Do you think it still plays well in today's date?
It doesn't read like a contemporary look back.
Right.
It is very much an archival piece.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So now we move on to Finding Tulsa. So
yes. My seventh.
Yeah. So this is really an interesting idea. 1990s gay cinema. Now let's talk about the preface of this.
Basically, it's one of the ones that it's what I call my odyssey, because it took me about 20 years to finish. I had a real burst of creativity in the mid-90s where I basically was writing 4 novels at once. I didn't know which one was the better one. Pins ended up coming in first place, but Finding Tulsa just took forever because it's big for my books. Usually my books are like, here's the main character, here's a few others, and then some stuff happens. This one is basically an entire career kind of snarkily told by Stan Grozniak, a gay filmmaker of the new queer cinema, a contemporary of Todd Haynes and others, who made a wacky, sexy trilogy a la, Evil Dead, kind of, with a little bit of Raiders of the Lost Ark, with his sexy star, Dirk Dack. I need to have notes. Anyway, so, and then he kind of like falls out of favor because he made a few gay art films that were poorly received, and just kind of lost his impetus. And then his ex-boyfriend, Barry, a producer, says, look, we have this mainstream TV movie with a gay theme, and I want you to direct it. And he's like, he's been working in a video store with his costume designer friend, Jorge. So he's really not up for it, and he gets coaxed into it. And at the same time, he's casting. He decides to do an open call, which is ridiculous, unheard of. Although I actually did this for a show I did in New York. You do an open call in backstage, and you get mail bags full of headshots. I mean, there's like hundreds of them. So I recreated that and had Stan going through these headshots. And among the headshots he finds is that of Lance, who played Tulsa in a Ohio community theater production of Gypsy, where Stan was the young Tulsa and Lance was the older Tulsa. And of course he had a wild crush on him. Didn't know he was gay. He knew he was gay, but he didn't know if Lance was gay. But anyway, so he finds him and he casts him in the movie, and then a rekindled romance between his boyhood crush resumes. There's a lot of references to Gypsy throughout because I was in the production of Gypsy as a kid. And I didn't just have a crush on the guy who played Tulsa. I pretty much had a crush on all the college boys in the chorus because they were all so adorable. But being in a production of Gypsy at a very young age in a conservative town in Ohio in the 70s was a really a lightning bolt of an experience because it was about sex. It's the story of a stripper and theater, and it had this huge history of musical theater. So I felt very lucky to be part of it, and it obviously embedded in me for years afterwards because the writing scenes when Stan is a kid, are basically autofiction. I mean, that's stuff based on stuff that happens. I just change the names to protect the guilty.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's about happy endings. It's about sex. It's a lot about age. There's a lot of people who are gone who kind of spook and ghost around in Stan's life. And then in the middle of it all, he gets asked to direct a porn film. He's about to win, possibly be nominated for an Emmy Award, and he says, well, screw it all. If this falls apart, I want to do this thing in my life. And he's dating Lance by this time, and Lance is like, fine, whatever, have fun, just, get a test and use condoms. And he makes an epic porn film that becomes this art classic, unexpectedly success. So it's like a dual kind of victory for him. But again, it's a little fantasy fulfillment. It's also based on practical experience I have being on film sets, having been in musical theater, and deciding to let those two worlds collide.
And being a gay adult video star.
Well, no, he's director.
Well, I'm talking about you.
Oh, no. I've befriended many an adult film actor, but no, none of that.
Oh, well, what did you have in your mind doing this book? Like, what were you hoping people get out of this book?
That's a tough question. It's like, I hope you're entertained. I hope you remember these times. There was a bit of, quote, nostalgia, to go back to my friend John Weir, in a lot of my books, because I set them in a specific time period because I want to remember it. A lot of new books are, a lot of texting, a lot of phones, a lot of TV shows are the plot is based on I have no cell service, and I hate that.
Yeah.
So I write mostly about the era where we didn't have that, where we had to call each other or see each other in time and space and actually meet or not meet as a dramatic impetus. So it's basically a kind of, memoir of this stuff happened. Here's a fictional version of it, but here's what this era was like for those who lived through it, which some reviewers liked and did experience it, and then the others who were like, I didn't know this kind of thing was going on. I didn't know that gay Hollywood was so, kind of open and yet not open in the 90s. And also just writing about LA, which I visited several times, was fun because I, again, more research. It was like, wait, where does Sepulveda end? And how far is it to drive from Santa Monica to, Van Nuys? All that kind of traffic stuff I love. I have maps that I would use, and my brother lives in LA, so I got to cull a lot of information from him. And I have friends in LA, from Tim Miller to other folks who introduced me to people like Shishi LaRue and Lance Loud. And every time I went there, it was like an interview magazine, because you always bump into somebody famous.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask if you had to do a lot of research into it, or if you could rely a lot on memory from those times.
It was a blend. I mean, there were things where it was like I was at a fancy party and there was a pool and there were a lot of hot guys, and some of them were porn actors and some weren't. And I took notes in my head, and I was like, this is going to go in the book, because I already had the book conceptualized. But they're sense memories that you get. Yeah, I didn't experience the Rodney King riots there, but I recreated what I experienced when it happened. When I think it was in New York. So that was pretty pivotal, because that was obviously a very huge Los Angeles event. I'm a little obtuse in my descriptions of it, and you have to read it to understand it. But those days, that era was very specific in terms of Los Angeles, in terms of gay culture, the protests that happened, and things that I just thought, well, I want to document this. I want to make it big too, because a lot of my other books are shorter. I basically, it's sprawling. As my editor, Jerry Wheeler, said, you're showing off. he had a lot of edits that suggested I didn't take them all, but yeah, I want it to be a big, because the character of Stan Grosniak is funny. He's not me. He's a bigger guy. He's chunky, and he doesn't really fit into categories like a bear or an otter. He jokes that there should be a category of smooth, chunky guys called dolphins. But and it's a very specific person that I visually based it on, but it's the story of a fictional filmmaker that's based on several of my friends who make movies, who gave me notes and said, no, a key grip does this, etc., things like that.
So how do you yourself, when you're putting a book together like this, how do you get these characters, and how do you see them? Are you seeing them in your mind, or do you hear their voices? Do you kind of go through the motions of the story? How does that work for you?
In different ways, it works differently for each story, but yeah, I do hear them. I mean, I have a theatrical, cinematic mind because of the training. I really credit my theater training in teaching me about about dialogue. You have to know when a scene is over. Something has to happen in that scene. People should be talking about something happens, something changes, not just, oh, what are we having for lunch? So that's important. But at the same time, the sound of a book and the colors of a book, they really did grow. It was this period where I just had a garden full of ideas, and I was like, oh, this is very florid. Okay, this goes in that book. Oh, this is very New York. Okay, that goes in the Bike Messenger book. So that's kind of where I would get these weeds that would grow into these beautiful vines, and I would know how to place them and where to put the ideas. But for some things like pins, I immediately there was an actual crime that happened, and then where a kid was killed, and then there was another crime at the same time on TV about a gang rape on a wrestling team. And I thought, well, those go together. And then visiting New Jersey and being near it, and I wanted something that was very urban, that was very, well, suburban actually, but in the dialect of New Jersey, which is very different than the Cater Waiter novel, which is very effete. It sounds like Michael Musto or some gossip columnist might have written it. So the tone is great because I basically take on a character when I'm writing a different style.
I'm just wondering, as with character creation, have your characters done anything maybe to surprise you? Do they kind of rebel against the storyline, the plot, anything like that? Or do you feel like you're very in control?
No. No. Particularly with my fourth and fifth novels, Every Time I Think of You and the sequel, Message of Love, the first three, there were 3 chapters in Every Time I Think of You that were based on a dream. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and fortunately I didn't have to go to work that day, and I had coffee. And I wrote what I thought would be a cute short story. And then it kept going, and it just kept going and going. I was like, oh my God, this is a novel. I'm pregnant. 9 months later, I finished it, and fortunately it won a Land Literary Award. It's the least amount of work for the most amount of profit and success, which wow. I have no clue about that. But at one point, I was literally halfway through the story, and I was like, okay, now what? And then I realized, oh, Everett's going to become a paraplegic. He's going to have a lacrosse accident. And I had not clearly done disabled writing, except for a bit in pins with, wrestling injuries. And I had realized I had a heck ton of work to do in terms of research. So I called up, I had 3 wheelchair-using friends, 2 of them are dancers, actually, and said, we need to have a chat because I want to get this right. And a lot of disability-themed nonfiction and fiction. There was a lot of cliche stuff that's bad. I wanted to see the worst of it, like the straight romances where, the former cheerleader has to heal the former football player who got his legs blown off in the war. And there's a lot of bad fiction about disabled people. And being not disabled, I knew I could get it wrong. So along with the creative impulse based on dreams, I had to get it right about what was it like in 1980, what kind of wheelchairs were available, what was available in terms of physical therapy, where would he go? It's set in Pennsylvania, so where would he go for that? So all that stuff led to stories, and the sequel was even more so. I visited Philadelphia. I went to places where the characters would have gone to school at Temple and at Penn. I actually found where they could have had an apartment that was accessible. I actually took pictures of it, knocked on the door. They gave me a tour because it was a ramp outside this apartment where they could have lived. And the resident was very nice. And I said, I'm writing a book and I think I want to use this house. And she's like, yeah, there was a ramp for an older lady who used to live here, blah, blah, blah. So this is all not, you don't see it in the book as much as I just know that I got it right. And that's where the creativity leads, visiting archives at Penn and Temple and finding out when they added ramps to certain buildings. And surprisingly, that Temple had not only a thriving gay community of activists, but they also were very accessible. They had hundreds of wheelchair-using students. So that was something that was fascinating to me. But then also Everett, his parents pressured him to transfer to Penn because they're rich and they wanted him to go to an impressive school, not just one that's accessible. So he becomes a kind of guinea pig for Penn to show off. Look, we have our disabled student, and we are doing this. Here we're putting a little ramp for the swimming pool. So it became, and this actually happened. There was a lawsuit where students were not being able to get into these old buildings because they all had stairs. And so it became part of the story. The actual history of disability and gay student unions that I found in the yearbooks and the newspaper became a part of this story in the 1980s. So that was fun. That was really fun. I was glad it got the attention it deserved because I categorized them as romances, but I really broke the rules in terms of romance. Somebody dies. They have affairs. There's a lot of rules in romances where you're not supposed to have certain things happen, and I broke them all.
Oh, good. We like that. Well, and it's something like Tulsa and even any of your books here, when we look at it, underneath it all, is there some sort of a subtext or a plot or something that you've put in the books? And maybe even it happened organically. It might not have been conscious at the time, but when you look back at it, you realize there's something else going on underneath the story.
Several of the books have a mythological subtext. Pins is basically an allegory for the Saint Sebastian story. Cyclism is really not only about activists and bike messengers, but about the myth of the decline of the centaurs. And you can see a centaur smack dab right on the shoulder of the cover model that I photoshopped over his own tattoo of a centaur. So it's not subtle, but at the same time, those are my little clues to help me get through the story, to help minimize and focus on the color scheme. For instance, Monkey Suits, the cater waitering book. It's about the Reagan 1980s. It's about gay cater waiters with a little act up in there, but it's basically about this slave culture, this voluntary slave culture where people, $15 an hour doesn't sound like slave wages to most people, but I kept it in muted colors, in blacks and whites mostly. I didn't involve a lot of florid colors because I wanted it to look and feel like a New Yorker cartoon. Very of an era, very caricatures. And others ones were much more full and fully humanized characters, like Every Time I Think of You and Message of Love. With Finding Tulsa, the Odyssey is woven in, as well as the story of Gypsy. So I find inspiration from something else that I find somewhere midpoint through the story. It's like, what does this sound like? What story am I actually telling here? And I agree with the whole Joseph, the hero's journey and stuff, but it's not always about the hero's journey. Sometimes he's not a hero, he's a coward. But I think underneath it all, and the reason I write gay male fiction, is that the humanity of people is really the undercurrent of the whole thing. People are basically good. They go through stuff and they find love, or they don't. And
they die.
And I want to showcase the humanity of people.
Yeah. If someone had never heard of you before, highly unlikely, but there might be a few out there. What one book would you say is a must read or a good read that would help them get to know what kind of a writer you are?
Huh, that's weird. Well, Pins, because I have extra copies, and I'll mail you. I still have one more box full in the basement.
Oh, there you go.
The one that I think it has surprised people, and it kind of fell by the wayside, but yet I'm very proud of it, is my sixth novel, Now I'm Here. It's about a piano prodigy who falls in love with the son of a pumpkin farmer in rural Ohio. It's very sad, but very beautiful. The loose little pieces of it that reveal my own life are, I did get some local notoriety for playing a piano solo version of Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. Before there were flash mobs and, malls where you could, become quickly famous. And then the pumpkin farmer stuff is I actually worked on a pumpkin farm. So these were two separate stories that I realized were going to clash and go together. And it really deals with AIDS very specifically. And again, I broke the rules where you're supposed to have a hero, you're supposed to have a survivor. And I was like, you know what? Hundreds of thousands of people did not survive. So sorry. And it's a heartbreaker. And I'm glad I got through it, because I think there's a lot of revisionism now where people are saying we don't need tragic gay stories anymore. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's important. But yeah, the world is changing. And with that, social media, how do you like social media, and do you use it? Where do people find Jim?
I do all the things except TikTok. I refuse to do
Oh, God.
Again, the YouTube channel, I have my own website, has links to all the things. My author page on Facebook, the Twitter account is okay. Instagram is fun. I do what I think the tone of each of these media should be. Instagram is, my neighbor's cats, and here's my book, and here's a bee floating around a plant. It's not very intense. It's light and it's fun. Twitter is basically self-promotion. and I don't get into politics. You don't want to know what I think. I'm not a political person. I mean, I'm political. Obviously, I'll forward something, good, but I don't indulge in the memes of the Republicans and maligning them because so many other people do that so well. I don't want to get into that vat of feces. And Facebook, again, it's like you learn to just like get in and get out, do your thing, and not indulge in too much. Because I also co-manage the BAR's social media as well, and have to be even more reserved when someone says something really stupid, or if they say something hateful, we delete it. But if they say something stupid, I just have to let it go because that's their comment and that's where they're coming from. Goodreads is another place too where you just post your stuff and you like something and you post a review and that's it. I got into a flame war with some idiot who was attacking one of my books, and that was a big mistake. And I learned very quickly that you don't do that because people on Goodreads, it's really about the readers using the books to talk about themselves and other things. It's not about the author. And it's kind of it's an evil good thing because you do get likes and you do get sales, but once they turn on you, oh my God.
Yeah. Well, I personally hunt them down, and take them out. But that's a different story. That's a whole other.
It's weird. You're supposed to be very personable and open, and at the same time, you have to keep your guard up.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's different. It's an unusual tool. It's something you have to learn, and it's kind of I get tons of hate mail.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. But for the most part, it's okay now. I mean, there was a time when it used to stress me out. But the last few years, I barely get in any fights anymore, and I barely go after anybody, or get into it. Because it takes your mind off of what you're trying to do. Right. It takes you out of your art. If you're doing a book or if you're doing a show, and you got to focus on what you're doing and not that noise on the outside, or you never get anything done, or it'll affect your job that you are doing. It makes it different, I mean, how did things like the COVID work for you in your writing and that? Do you find that, because we have to admit the last few years have been kind of stressful, kind of weird. Certainly things we've never really dealt with before between the politics and the intensity of it, as well as, let's say, the COVID and just everything. So when all of that's going on outside of your door, do you kind of change how you write, or does it interfere?
I pretty much had Finding Tulsa underway before it hit, and my publisher, Palm Drive, said, let's go through with this. And I was like, really? We're going to publish a book about a 90s gay filmmaker in the middle of a plague, a month before the most contentious election since 2000? And he's like, yes.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Well, people had already started pivoting by doing YouTube and Zoom chats, author chats. And I had done a few, and I did the first one with Dog-Eared Books, which is now Fabulosa Books, where the original A Different Light bookstore was on Castro Street. So I kind of brought them into the present of, you need to do this. You need to start doing online chats. And so I was proud of that. I did a lovely chat with Baruch Torres Hernandez, who's a brilliant writer and poet and comic here in San Francisco. So that was the pivot, was, okay, I can do a Saints and Sinners chat. I will propose a panel because I'm not going to New Orleans and neither is anyone else. So we had a great panel, a diverse panel that we all talked about stuff and got through it. And then I did other chats with other bookstores. I got to do a chat with the Bureau of General Services Queer Division in New York, because without going to New York. So, and then I also got more job responsibilities, so I didn't lose my job like so many other people did. And we had to keep the Bay Area Reporter running. We were down to like 12 pages for a year. And we did a fundraising scheme where a membership drive, and I made a trailer with all these historic, covers from the paper. So I hunkered down. Basically, the introvert in me was like, I get to stay home. Whee! Yeah. And I got stuff done. And at the same time, I would like binge on, Ben and Jerry's and watch too many, Flash episodes. But I tried to balance it out between, hunkering down and putting stuff out there. Because people still wanted to see things. They wanted to read things. And they did.
Yeah. Yeah. Unusual time, So what do you got coming up next? Like, what are you working on now?
Trying to assemble one of my next two novels, which are both kind of light comedic. Trying to get the motivation to get a memoir out about my dance and theater years. Basically, just chapters about that, not my whole life story, because nobody wants to read that. But focusing on the wonderful and sad memories of being in the theater since I was a kid, and how dance and theater led to becoming a writer. That's basically the thrust of that. But again, I don't do queries well, so I'm enjoying reading all my other friends' memoirs that they all wrote during the plague. So
Yeah, well, if you put pictures in it, people will want to see it. Come on.
there's that. But I'm really surprised and thrilled by several colleagues' books, memoirs, and fiction that they've put out, and supporting them through my job, but also just reading them. Reading books and supporting other artists as well.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Networking's great. I think it helps you as much as them, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's fun to be able to do that. I get a pitch from one of my freelancers here at work that says, "Oh, I just did an interview with John Waters about the 50th anniversary of Pink Flamingos." And I was like, "Yay!" And I edited it, put it together, insert a trailer, and it's great. So we have an interview with John Waters in our Pride issue, and then he also paired it with a review of the book about of the collected writings of the late Cookie Muller, who was one of his actors, but also she did other things. So just thinking that, oh my God, think of all those people who know John Waters but don't remember Cookie Muller. Now they do. And that's because I said yes to that article. He wrote it, Mark William Norby, and it's out there. And I'm thrilled by that kind of stuff. Every week I get that sense of satisfaction in sharing other people's art. So that's fun.
Yeah. It's a good life that way. How is the Bay Area Reporter doing that? How are the old typical newspaper and magazines and stuff? How do you think it's doing?
Well, I just took a picture of a huge stack of our papers of the 80-page Pride issue, which is going out on newsstands today. And I just did a triple social media link to those out of town. They can do the full page view version, PDF viewable online. So we got through it. And those advertisers came on board and helped us. And, I was able to assign a dozen plus stories and get things in there that I like, as well as things that I didn't know about before. So that's part of it. But also we had as I said before, we had a member subscription program where people could donate and then get extra access to stories. And I put together the historic trailer on the BAR's YouTube channel. Just look up Bay Area Reporter. And then I produced a dozen online chats through all of last year to celebrate the paper's 50th anniversary, which was really fun. I mean, I use StreamYard, not Zoom, just because it's easier.
Yeah.
But I would, contact a few writers, a few local famous people and say, let's have a chat. And we would talk about film, or we talked about pornography, or we talked about the crime that was covered over the years, or we talked about specifically politics. And we got some notable people we had hundreds of views on Facebook, and the archived versions on YouTube they have like 50 to 100 views. But I'm just glad I got to produce these series because I knew how to do it. But also, we now have an archive of pretty much all the main topics that the paper has covered in the last 50 years, with some veteran writers and photographers who were there in the 70s and the 80s, who were there with the paper when it was, when it was kind of ratty, when it was very opinionated. So the evolution of LGBT journalism, you can see through the evolution of the Bay Area Reporter, which I've been working for off and on for 30 years. So I'm kind of proud to be part of it. But also, it gave me this outlet to write about things and to assign other people to write things that, it's just this bouquet every week is like, look at all these things. I just love sharing, these feature articles. Like, Cornelius Washington did an interview with Martha Wash, or I got to interview Eric Orner. I'm going to do a story next week with the cartoonist. Fabulous guy. He has a new book about Barney Frank, a graphic novel. And, we all love the mostly unfabulous life of Ethan Green. Was it Green? And he's got a new project out. So I was like, hey, call me up. And, just to be able to do that, to have that advantage, to be able to just say, let's get this trans film out there. Let's get this out here. Let's get this new, exhibit promoted. And I wish I had 20 more pages a week, but I would be exhausted.
Yeah, that's it, But yeah, and we so I had them put the Bay Area Reporter and Fabuloso books up on our websites as well. So
great.
It's on every page, and we'll have yours up as well. Certainly been great talking to you, and everyone. You got to buy the book, like one of his books, Finding Tulsa. Do something.
Yeah.
He needs, he needs it. Come on, he needs food. Help this man out.
Well, it's not so much. It's not about the money. It's about the readership. It's about. I wouldn't have published it if I didn't think it had something of value for your entertainment, at least.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. Our guest is Jim Provenzano. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan and Dave.
Thanks, Jim.
Tired of wasting time trying to decide what to watch on your streaming service? Go to our website and look for the Martino movie reviews.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Yeah. Good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.